I guess.
Hey, everybody. How we doing?
All right.
What's going on here? Somebody seems to have my, oh, somebody's sharing are either of you sharing your screen? Somebody is. Richard or
Yes,
Olga, are either of you sharing your screen?
You're not. Say no.
I'm trying to join.
Well, you are joined. You're here. Okay.
But I'm not. I don't.
Are you seeing a page and it's got like it's like a little square and it says Zoom, join a meeting or sign in?
It says Zoom, join the meeting, sign in.
Okay. Up in the upper right hand corner, there's an X. Just click on it.
I just did.
Okay. It doesn't seem to be going away. But yeah, that's actually you, Richard, because I'm watching you move the cursor and stuff, and I'm looking at your desktop. Yeah, and I can't. Yeah, I can't. Until you get out of sharing. Yeah, I can't do much.
Let me see. Can I help them? Probably not. I'll see.
Okay.
You think it's the ad trick, or can you get out of that?
Yeah, if you would, yeah, you got to close that box right there where it says sign in or join. You got to kind of click on it.
Click that. Click that.
Or somewhere on your screen, if you go down to the bottom, it says share screen.
See that?
Yeah, click on that again and see if it allows you to stop sharing.
It says you cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing. So click OK. Okay. It still says okay.
Launch meeting.
Try it. Okay, launch again. See if that works.
Well, okay, you can try it. Zoom United.
Hit exit tutorial mode.
Oh.
Click that blue thing.
I see the face on the side, but not on the screen.
Say what? Yeah, no.
Now,
right now.
Twice.
Yeah, right now, Richard seems to be sharing his screen with us, and he's like in a tutorial or whatever, but yeah.
Maybe I need to leave and come back.
Yeah, that might help. Well, okay. Yeah, I'm still seeing your screen.
No, I'm seeing a tutorial as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We're all seeing Richard's screen right now.
So I'm gonna leave and come back.
No. It doesn't matter whether you leave. It's Richard has to. I think it's Richard. Is anybody else in tutorial mode?
No.
Hope not.
Don't think so.
I'm in Zoom, just regular Zoom.
Okay, because somebody is sharing their screen. I don't know who.
Well, we all want to leave and come back?
Well.
There you go.
Oh, hey. Okay, it went away. Yay. Okay, yeah, whoever that was. Okay. All right. Yep. What fun, right? So let's see, who have we got here? We got 6 of us here. Richard was here. Maybe he'll sign back in. And
Yeah,
not,
he'll be back.
yeah, okay, he's just signing in now. Okay, and Olga's here. Okay, John, oh, Richard, yeah, Bob, Naomi, Veronica. Okay, all right. Well, first of all, happy Monday, and happy
Happy
Easter.
Monday.
Yeah,
Happy Monday.
since today is actually officially Easter, right? From what I understand, that's what's on the calendar. Yesterday was Easter Sunday, right? Did anybody go out and run around and look for Easter eggs?
Can't say as I did.
No.
You know, I
I found some eggs in my refrigerator.
did you dye any eggs or anything like that?
Nope.
No. Okay. Yeah. Well, I've got eggs in my refrigerator too, but they're not boiled.
Ah,
I didn't dye them or decorate them, so I guess I
I
would.
dyed mine Blanco.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hadn't. Well, mine come brown. I usually buy brown. But anyway.
That's the fellow.
mine are brown too.
Yeah. It's yeah.
You unmute?
At any rate. Okay, so today we're going to look at some mysteries in art. Okay, and it's it's a really fun video. It's a very long video, and we probably won't be able to see all of it. But you know, it's from this guy who does Perspective, the YouTube channel, and really fascinating stories. I watched most of this, and yeah, there's some interesting stuff. He gives you a lot of background behind different artists and why they painted things the way they did. And so that's what we're going to watch today. And you know, he covers, it's mainly European art, but really fascinating stories. So hopefully, does everybody have a cup of coffee or tea?
Bring it on.
I'm waiting for the chance to say hello to everybody.
Okay, well, here's your chance, Armando. Go ahead and say hello to everybody.
Everybody, good morning, everybody. I hope all of you have a happy Easter and a happy Passover.
Yeah. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Louise.
I got my Easter dinner. Thank goodness. It was good.
Good. All right. Anyway, yeah, we got 11 of us here. Yay! All right. So anyway, this should be a fun ride. You know, just sit back, cup of coffee. You know, some of these stories are really fascinating, and I think you'll enjoy them.
You'll find these things, you know, about every 5 seconds.
Oh, Miss Claudia's back. Hello, Miss Claudia.
She is.
Hello, Miss Armando.
Yeah. All right, guys, away we go.
Well, mini-series.
I don't know. Super Chainsaw. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get that, Ed.
Hello, this is Valdemar Nostrat, art critic, producer and presenter of documentaries. Thanks for watching Perspective, YouTube's home for classical art.
Perspective.
Don't know if you've read it. It's in all the bestseller lists. Don't bother if you haven't. It's so silly. It starts with someone being killed in one of the corridors here at the Louvre in Paris. This chap is the keeper of an ancient secret, and if he dies, the ancient secret dies with him. So he crawls along the long corridor and seeks out the most famous painting in the Louvre. And scrawls a secret message on the glass that protects the Mona Lisa. Now, the Mona Lisa has long been a magnet for mystery addicts and fruitcakes. You want mysteries? She's got loads of them. The mystery of her elusive identity, the mystery of her elusive smile. It's even been said she's a projected self-portrait of Leonardo as a cross-dresser. Even her eyebrows are mysterious. Why hasn't she got any? But there is one mystery concerning the Mona Lisa that can actually be solved, and we're going to do it in this film. It's perhaps the deepest mystery of all, and that is why, out of all the countless old masters gathered in all our museums, why did this particular one become the most famous painting in the world? Now that's a mystery worth solving. The Mona Lisa is 500 years old. She was painted in Florence in around 1503. In Paris, they've recently been celebrating her birthday. 500 years old.
Recording.
But the first thing to grasp about the Mona Lisa's ridiculous fame is that it's rather new. For 300 years after she was painted, the Mona Lisa was almost entirely unknown. Just a handful of people in history had ever seen her or even heard of her. She only started to become famous about 150 years ago, and really, really famous, this famous, in the 20th century. So her fame is rather new. So, by the way, is the fame of her creator, Leonardo da Vinci. Today we think of Leonardo as the greatest genius of the Renaissance, scientist, mathematician, anatomist, the man who not only painted the Mona Lisa, but who also invented flying machines, submarines, and bicycles. And it's just not true. I'm not saying that Leonardo didn't vaguely imagine some of those things, but I am saying that he never actually built any of them. Leonardo almost discovered lots of things, but only almost. His tragedy is that he never went the final mile, the bit that counts.
Well, Leonardo was not that celebrated. One of the problems is that Leonardo did not paint very much. Whereas Raphael was on production line, one after the other. Michelangelo did the whole ceiling, after all, and walls of the Sistine Chapel. Huge project in 4 years, which is what apparently, it took Leonardo to paint, this tiny portrait. So if you wanted, lots of work, you were not going to ask him.
You know that famous drawing that people always say is him, the old man with the big biblical beard and the all-seeing eyes? Well, there's no actual evidence. It's Leonardo, just our wishful thinking, because this old man with the big beard reminds us of some great biblical leader, doesn't he? Moses, perhaps, or even God. So the next thing to get clear in our minds is that Leonardo da Vinci is chiefly, like this, a work of fiction. Before we tiptoe any further into the conceptual quagmire that is the mystery of the Mona Lisa, I think we need to find out a tad more about the real Leonardo. Olives. They're everywhere on this hill. In fact, just about the only thing that's up here is olive groves. We're about 2 kilometers out of Vinci, little Tuscan town of Vinci, a place called Anciano. About 20 miles out of Florence. And this simple little Tuscan hill house is the house in which Leonardo da Vinci was born, 1452. His father was a notary, a lawyer, called Ser Piero da Vinci, and his mother, all we know about her is that she was called Caterina, and Leonardo was their illegitimate son.
Okay. Now, just to interject one thing. All right. So he was born in 1452. Anybody else know what was going on in 1452?
The
No.
discovery of America?
Yes, Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Right.
How about that? Okay.
Yeah.
So he was born about the time that they were they were discovering that there was a whole nother set of continents over here. Okay.
Leonardo's father bought this house from the friars that used to own it. He was working for them as a lawyer, and it's hardly changed since then. It's just two very basic little rooms, really, lovingly preserved in their original state of decrepitude. But look at this, just above the window on the front. A lion wearing a helmet. That's the coat of arms of the Da Vinci family. Original fireplace. Leonardo. Ghastly likeness, I think. Coat of arms again.
I am now one of the millions of American seniors who have their groceries covered by the government. I could buy more than just.
Oh.
It's such
I would like to get my grocery covered.
a big brain to have been born. Leonardo's artistic career is so frustrating. He's always starting things and never finishing them. He spent the first 30 years of his life in Florence, yet all he had to show for all this time was a couple of pictures. One of them is this gorgeous portrait of Ginevra de' Benci. She's rather glum. Why? In Italian, Ginevra means juniper, so the halo of juniper around her head is a coded clue to her identity. From the start, Leonardo could make his women feel mysterious. Here's an early Madonna and Child that hangs in the Hermitage in Russia. What a ghastly, multi-handed Jesus. Look at the size of him. I don't like her expression either. It looks forced to me. Say cheese. Cheese. These early experiments with different women's expressions had such mixed results that Leonardo soon settled on one he knew he could rely on, an expression he always used. You know it already. It's that mysterious smile playing on a woman's lips. Whether they're the Virgin Mary or a girl off the street, Leonardo began giving his women the same look. The Mona Lisa's mysterious smile was an expression he was churning out. For the next 20 years, Leonardo worked in Milan as the in-house genius for the local dukes, starting lots of things, finishing none of them, except this. The Last Supper, the famous masterpiece that's been falling off the wall ever since he painted it, because the technique he used was so lousy. After 20 years in Milan, he returned to Florence. He was already in his 50s when a commission came his way that would finally lead to his most famous achievement. A portrait of a plumpish Florentine merchant's wife named Lisa Gherardini. There are lots of extraordinary surprises in the story of the Mona Lisa, but perhaps the earliest of them is that story begins here, in this grim little Florentine street called the Via della Stufa. Now, this is the street in which Lisa Gherardini, who is traditionally thought to have been the Florentine lady who posed for the Mona Lisa, actually lived. She was married to a Florentine cloth merchant called Francesco del Giaconde, And that explains why in France she's known as La Gioconde, why in Italy they call her La Gioconda, and why, rather confusingly, the rest of us call her Mona Lisa, Madonna Lisa. It's what everybody would have said to her. Madonna Lisa becomes Mona Lisa. Thus, in this grim little Florentine street, populated these days chiefly by Florentine lowlife, the great legend of the Mona Lisa was born. For some reason, Leonardo never handed over the Mona Lisa to Francisco del Giocondo and his wife, probably because he never considered her finished. He was such a fiddler. Leonardo's career was now on the slide. In Italy, he was out of fashion, and his reputation for not finishing things preceded him wherever he wandered. Internationally, what fame he had was due entirely to his much-copied comic grotesques of ugly old men and big-nosed Jews. They're rather racist, really. It was the French king Francois I who saved Leonardo by taking him in when no one else would have him. Francois invited the 64-year-old multitasker to work for him in France in this chateau at Amboise on the Loire. Leonardo brought the Mona Lisa with him and no doubt fiddled with her some more. When he died here 3 years later, in 1519, the Mona Lisa entered the French royal collection and to all intents and purposes disappeared for 300 years.
And then the first great break for the Mona Lisa, the first great career move, as I would put it, the French Revolution. What the French Revolution does, apart from minor things like abolishing the monarchy and so on, is to transform the Louvre into a museum. So at least she's now gone from, semi-obscurity to a proper place. Another thing is Napoleon. Napoleon took a shine to many women, and one of these was Mona Lisa, and indeed for, I think, 4 years, the Mona Lisa was removed from public viewing and was in Napoleon's bedroom. And then it was put back in the Louvre and has remained there ever since.
You know, before Napoleon carried the Mona Lisa away to his bedroom, hardly anyone had seen her, and no one thought of her as this figure of mystery and allure. She was a portrait by Leonardo, and that's it. But now that she was in the Louvre, and the Louvre was open to the public, she was ready to fall into the clutches of the public imagination. And so her ludicrous journey to global fame could finally begin. Hang on to your hats, because we're taking you on it. When we left you, the Mona Lisa had just got to the Louvre, and people could finally see what she looked like. They liked what they saw, but had trouble agreeing on what it was. Then, as now, everyone found something different in the Mona Lisa.
In the middle of the 19th century, some intellectuals and writers begin to discuss the Mona Lisa as the most formidable example of the femme fatale. This is when the smile becomes...
So my wife got me this weird tool, and I thought at first, yeah, it looks kind of crazy. But after using it just one time...
mysterious and enigmatic. There's no mention of an enigmatic smile with the Mona Lisa. I mean, basically, until about 1850, Mona Lisa is a cheerful housewife. From 1850 onwards, she is a castrating female.
You won't believe some of the silly things that began to be written about her by the feverish blokes of the 19th century. Let me read you something here. It's perhaps the most famous passage ever written about the Mona Lisa by an eccentric English Epicurean called Walter Pater, who was obsessed with her. She is older than the rocks among which she sits, he gushed in 1873. Like the vampire, she's been dead many times and learned the secrets of the grave and been a diver in deep seas. It just goes on and on. I mean, this isn't art history. This is stalking. The Mona Lisa had begun to drive men mad. Thus, the Mona Lisa entered the creative imagination of the 19th century, where she would have stayed famous among writers and art critics, and that's about it. If something else hadn't happened, something sensational, something that turned her into a public celebrity.
But of course, you needed an event, you needed a photo opportunity. And that occurred in the shape of an Italian workman, Vincenzo Perugia, who stole the painting in August 1911 and kept it for 2 years in his bedsit, not far from the Louvre, near the stove. The Mona Lisa is a piece of wood, so you can imagine the possibility, the terrible possibilities. And that made the world press. Every day for 3-4 weeks, there was something about the Mona Lisa. The police can't find it. The security of the Louvre is terrible. The director of the Department of Painting had to resign. You know, it became a sort of co-celeb, so people could see the Mona Lisa nearly every day as they were having their breakfast.
So why would anyone be so stupid as to steal the Mona Lisa? Various conspiracy theories were aired at the time, and indeed, people have been airing them ever since. The likeliest answer is that the entire mad plot was the handiwork of an Argentinian forger called Eduardo de Valfierno. Valfierno's crazy idea was to produce a handful, perhaps 6 or 7 copies of the Mona Lisa while he had it in his hands, and then to sell these copies on to some very, very gullible American millionaires. Now, this has never been proved. What's certain is that if you were a very gullible American millionaire, you would hardly have popped up afterwards and said, yes, I bought one of these. And undoubtedly, there were these very special copies floating around the European art world after the theft. However, once Valfierno had done his dirty deed and produced his copies, he no longer had any real need for the painting itself. So he handed it back to his accomplice, Perugia, and Perugia was stuck with the Mona Lisa, a painting that the whole world was looking for. What was he going to do with it? Perugia must have realized that the painting was far too hot to do anything with in France. So he came back here to Italy, and he holed up in this hotel in Florence, which used to be called the Tripoli Italia, but which, not surprisingly, has now changed its name to the Gioconda, because it's in this hotel that the great lost painting was finally found. Perugia contacted a Florentine antique dealer called Alfredo Geri and offered to sell him the Mona Lisa for £500,000 lira. Inevitably, Geri contacted the Italian police. 3 days later, they came here to the hotel and arrested Vincenzo Perugia. When they got inside Perugia's room, they found the Mona Lisa tucked away in a suitcase underneath his bed. When they asked him why he'd stolen her, Perugia replied that it was an act of patriotism all along. All he'd ever really wanted to do was ensure that the great Florentine beauty was returned to her rightful home. Perugia was sent down for a year for stealing the Mona Lisa, which doesn't seem very much, does it? But one thing's certain, no matter how famous the Mona Lisa was, before Perugia and his cronies stole her from the Louvre, his prior fame was as nothing compared with the enormous global notoriety that the picture acquired once all those newspapers and all those columns had stopped writing about the great theft of the Mona Lisa. And so our plump Florentine housewife finally became an international celebrity at the age of 400. Because of the robbery, everyone now knew what she looked like, and everyone wanted to know more about her. In 1919, the notorious Dada artist Marcel Duchamp proved she'd really arrived by taking the mickey out of her, giving her a moustache and a goatee, and adding the letters LH or Q, in French, a naughty pun, which means she's got a hot ass, or as we might perhaps say today, a hot booty.
There is not any single moment where the Mona Lisa becomes the world's most famous painting. There are building blocks, there are stepping stones. So being in Paris is an important thing. Being painted by a Renaissance genius is quite important. Being a femme fatale or being described as a castrating woman would do you no harm. Being stolen was a great stroke of luck. Being mocked by futurists and avant-garde artists was also very important. And being regularly exploited by the advertising industry in order to sell everything from fridge magnets, hotels, flights, and condoms even. All that is a tremendous asset for a girl.
I can't face going into detail about the subsequent growth.
So my wife got me this weird tool, and I thought at first, yeah, it looks kind of crazy. But after
Growth, Mona Lisa tat industry, it's too horrible to witness. Instead, let's just visit the house of the world's biggest hoarder of Mona Lisa memorabilia and savor some of the highlights of his collection.
Bonjour. Entrez dans la maison des Jocondes.
My house has become somewhat of a Mona Lisa museum, a shrine, if you like. I have gathered together some of the most beautiful items I have in my collection, like this wonderful photo mosaic here, although the reflection is a bit irritating. These magnificent cushions, these ceramic tiles from China, and this American, called the Giggling Mona Lisa, and this Persian rug. It's a bit amateurish, but still, it's magnificent. And this is something I made myself. It's based on William Tell, but as you can see, the arrow has missed its target.
Once you're famous for being famous, all you can really do is become more famous still. It's the golden rule of modern celebrity. The case of Lisa Gherardini proves it so clearly. So that's cleared up the mystery of how the Mona Lisa got famous. What it doesn't explain is how she ever managed to be obscure in the first place. How can a painting as wonderful as this ever be obscure? Go on, forget everything you've ever heard about her. Forget the teacups and the posters. Just go and look at her properly. You'll enjoy it. There are a million stories in the world of art. This has been just one of them.
And there are more.
You know that scene in the first Bond movie, Dr. No, where a glistening Ursula Andress emerges from the sea in a skimpy bikini right in front of the excited Sean Connery? Of course you remember it. It's one of the most famous arrivals in the movies. Well, what you may not know is that the inventor of James Bond, Ian Fleming, had a particular Quattrocento painting in mind when he imagined this unforgettable scene. It's a revolutionary painting produced in Florence in about 1485 of another goddess coming out of the sea. Not a screen goddess this time, but an ancient Roman one. Botticelli's Venus, the most celebrated nude goddess in art. Her face instantly recognizable. because this Venus has infiltrated popular consciousness to an unusually deep level. She's everywhere. But hold on a bit. Ursula Andress was meant to be sexy and stirring in that beefy Swiss way of hers. She was after big desires and sweaty passions. That's definitely not what Botticelli's Venus is trying to do. The Venus doesn't do sweatiness. She is to Ursula Andress what an orchid is to a T-bone steak. She's delicate, fragile, modest. And I've always thought there's something of the Lady Di about her. That shy tilt of the neck, the little look down, the fetching nervousness. But if Botticelli never had in mind the full-blooded arousal of all those who looked at his sensationally famous Venus arriving naked on the beach, which he didn't, what exactly was he after?
The real trouble with the birth of Venus is that we just know it too well now. And so we have no way of trying to arrive back at the moment in art and in Western culture when it didn't exist. Because if we could get back to that moment, then we would understand in a very visceral as well as intellectual way what a revolutionary painting it was and in some ways still is.
Botticelli's real name was Alessandro di Mariano di Vanni Filippi. He was born in Florence, where that house is behind me, in 1444, in the parish of All Saints, Ognissanti. His father, a leather worker, was 50 when Sandro was born. His mother was well over 40. That's late, even by modern standards. In Renaissance times, it was asking for health troubles. Little Sandro was the Filippi's fourth son, the runt of his litter. All his life people would say about him, Sandro bello e mal sacro. Sandro is handsome but unhealthy. He was always pale, apparently, and don't you think that some of this inherent paleness found its way into his art? There are two recorded explanations for why Alessandro dei Filippi came to be called Botticelli. The more boring of the two is that Botticelli is a corruption of the word battigello, which means someone who beats gold. When Botticelli was a teenager, he was apprenticed to a Florentine goldsmith, and may indeed have been just such a battigello or gold beater. His art always maintained a most fruitful relationship with gold, that's certainly true. Gold pops up in his paintings in lovely and interesting ways.
This $60 grout pen deep cleans any bathroom or kitchen tile in seconds.
Everybody
its
needs one,
formula
right?
Tackles grout.
But the explanation which I prefer for the origin of the name Botticelli is that it comes from his elder brother Giovanni, a successful city banker who was notoriously fat and therefore nicknamed Botticella, which means a barrel or a tub. Thus his sickly younger brother became Little Barrel, Botticelli. It could be true. What's sure is that when he was in his mid-teens, Little Barrel gave up goldsmithery and began his apprenticeship as a painter. And that delicacy of his, that slight sickliness which contemporaries remembered about him, gave him an advantage when it came to producing pictures of rare Florentine exquisiteness. Is there not something highly strung and frangible about all his art?
As far as we can tell, these big Botticelli paintings are basically furniture paintings. It may seem an odd way to regard them, these great, cherished, multi-million-pound masterpieces, but they were part of interior decoration, high-minded interior decoration of people who were very educated. And these are elite pictures for a very small circle of people. They certainly were not for public consumption.
This is the street in which Botticelli lived and worked until his death, and behind me is the house in which he must have painted The Birth of Venus. One of Botticelli's neighbours in this street gave his name to a country you may have heard of, America. He was Amerigo Vespucci, the great navigator. The Vespuccis were the richest and most powerful family in this locale, and Botticelli was soon working for them. In Italian, Vespa means wasp. That's why those annoying little scooters that buzz around Italian cities at night, right outside my hotel as a rule, are called Vespas. The wasp was the Vespucci family's symbol. See the wasps going into the hole in the tree there? They're an indication that this intriguing Botticelli was painted for the Vespucci family. And she's curious. She's one of the many women in Botticelli's art who at some point in their history have been identified as a portrait of Simonetta Vespucci. Simonetta was a much admired Florentine beauty who married into the Vespucci family. And there's a persistent rumour in art that she was also the model for Botticelli's Venus. But there's no evidence for this of any kind. In any case, Botticelli's women have a certain interchangeability to them, a group look. I really doubt whether this is Simonetta Vespucci. But what is intriguing is that this woman, although she's managed to hang on to all her clothes, is also a Venus. She's shown here with Mars, the god of war, whom she's tamed by exhausting him. How? Well, what do you think?
Oh dear.
Today, we all know Venus is the goddess of love. I'm your Venus, I'm your fire. What's your desire? And all that. But that's not how she began. Originally, Venus was a minor Roman goddess charged with the safekeeping of town gardens and vineyards, the goddess of allotments, like. It was only when this minor horticultural deity of the Romans took on and absorbed the identity of Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, that she grew into the potent and popular mythological starlet so many have since desired. Botticelli's most significant patrons were not in the end the Vespucci, but an even wealthier and more powerful Florentine family, those fabulously potent Firenze bankers, the Medici, who essentially ruled the city. And this rather gloomy rural retreat was owned by one of the lesser Medici, Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici. Essentially, this was his summer house, and somewhere in here, we don't know where, Botticelli's Birth of Venus used to hang. We don't know how it got here, we don't know when it got here, and we're not sure why it got here. But we do know that it hangs somewhere in this gloomy rural retreat, alongside yet another of Botticelli's remarkable love nest of Venuses. Hope you're feeling clever, because this painting takes a lot of keeping up with. It's called La Primavera, the spring, and it features Venus again. She's the one standing in the middle, rather quietly, but we know it's her because there's Cupid, her son, firing off arrows of love above her head. Here, Very important figure, because the picture really moves from this side to the other side. Over here, blowing out his cheeks, is Zephyr, the god of the west wind. Now, Zephyr is blowing away winter, and therefore, as it were, ushering in the spring. And as you can see, he's chasing this nymph here. She's Chloris. Zephyr fell in love with Chloris, but Chloris wasn't interested. He took her anyway. And what's happening is that the act of taking Chloris results in her transformation.
If you could just take any piece of paper and write down the most beautiful
Changes into Flora, the goddess of spring. Venus, as we said, is in the middle with Cupid above her, and she's attended by her usual attendants, the three Graces, joyously dancing. And over here, finally, is Mercury, waving his wand at the clouds to dispel them, and therefore preparing for the spring again. Now, he is probably a slightly disguised portrait of Lorenzo de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, as he was called. If it is him, he's the one who commissioned this picture, and if he commissioned it, he probably did it because one of his cousins, Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, who lived in the Villa di Castello, was getting married. This painting was meant to be an encouragement to him, and indeed it was meant to provide advice about fertility and how to bring out the best in your bride. It could be that the bride was a touch reluctant, like Chloris, and that she had to be forced into the marriage. But even if she was, it results in all this. In this astonishing, blooming, wonderful, flower-filled spring. This is one of the world's greatest ever evocations of fertility. Now remember, this used to hang too alongside the birth of Venus in the Villa di Castello. So are there any clues here to the kind of meaning we should be expecting from the birth of Venus? Of course there are. The Mona Lisa has mystery. The Venus de Milo has a great body. But Botticelli's Venus has the whole package. Mystery, the great body, hair that could drive a man wild with entanglement, and something else. An X factor. I've been puzzling over what this X factor might be for a couple of decades now, coming over to Florence, trying to work out why this particular woman toots so many people's horns. And I've come to believe that what gets us in the end is her vulnerability. Sure, all us guys want to jump into that picture with her and study some Latin, but we also want to wrap that cloak about her. She's come out of her shell on this blustery day, so cold, so fragile, so hesitant, and she looks so exposed. Botticelli's Venus makes us feel wanted. That amusing English poet, Alexander Pope, who was much taken with beautiful women, wrote once about a particularly gorgeous lady at court. Has she no faults then? Somebody asks him in the poem. Yes, she has one, I must aver, replies Pope. When all the world conspires to praise her, the woman's deaf and does not hear. Doesn't that remind you of Botticelli's Venus? She's outrageously beautiful, yet so embroiled is she in her own thoughts that she appears to be deaf to our praises and can't even hear our tongues hitting the tabletop at the sight of her.
When you first look at her, you think she's beautiful. But when you actually study her, there are two particular things that are sort of wrong with her. It is to do with her left shoulder. If you think about it and actually study the painting, her left shoulder is uncomfortable.
I need to divide her.
It actually sort of does that down there. The neck and the shoulder together do look slightly strange. when your eye concentrates upon them. And for me, the strange bit is looking at her foot as it stands on the shell, where there's a sort of bump.
That's what your club has.
Where the slightly old ladies get bumps when they try and put their slightly large feet into small shoes. And my eye is often drawn to that. And then I think, oh, I forgive him, she's been on the shell a long time. And, you know, maybe she's got cramp or whatever. But funny enough, it's not an anatomically beautiful body, but it is an aesthetically incredibly pleasing one.
She was painted in around 1485, maybe for Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco again. What is obvious is that this modesty she has, that shyness, the Lady Di look, is definitely intentional. We know this because her pose is based directly on a Roman statue owned by the Medici, the so-called Venus Pudica, or modest Venus. This Roman Venus covers herself up and hides her bits. She symbolises the sort of modesty that Florentines demanded of their women, particularly when they entered into marriage. So, although Botticelli's Venus is naked, indeed, she's the first great mythological nude of the Renaissance, and she's nearly life-size to boot. Despite all that, the effect Botticelli wanted to convey with her was surely one of modesty, not of exposure.
Though I don't think Botticelli's Birth of Venus is meant to be erotic, there is no doubt that she does open the door in Western art to the nude as carnal. And you only have to go 50 years down the line to Titian painting the Venus of Urbino, where you have a beautiful naked woman lying on a couch, incredibly aware of her own erotic teasing, and sort of saying, I am available sexually. And there begins such a great and terrible history of Western art and the female nude, which is about men looking at her and her needing to be desired. Now, I don't think Botticelli did that with Venus. I think that face still has a self-containment as a knowledge of some spirituality to it. But certainly once the cat is out of the bag, once the clothes are off the body, you can't control where it goes.
This is Hesiod's Theogony, the classical text that most clearly describes the birth of Venus. It's a hell of a story, blood-curdling. Uranus, the god of the sky, was being a beast to his mother and lover, Gaia, the earth. So Gaia persuaded their son, Kronos, a titan, to sneak up on Uranus while he was making love to Gaia and to cut off his testicles. Kronos then chucked these genitals into the sea. He locked them off with a flint and threw them from the mainland into the great wash of the seawater, and they drifted a while on the open sea and there spread into a circle of white foam. And from this circle of white foam grew a girl, Venus, or Aphrodite as she was first called. Thus Venus was the nautical fruit of Uranus's frothing testicles. Now, unless my eyes are failing me completely, none of this bears any relation to anything we can see in the Botticelli. We've got naked Venus in a shell, the shell's in the sea, and she's surrounded by a cluster of mythological figures. But surely no one here is being born. No frothing, no castration, no testicles. Yet if this isn't the birth of Venus, as we've been misinformed for hundreds of years, what else could it be? Let's have a close look at all this nature on show here. This excellent horticulture. There's plenty of it, and it's all meaningful. This little plant here between her legs, that's an anemone, a lovely spring favourite, which, according to legend, only grows when there's a warm wind. So the ancients used to call it the windflower. And lo and behold, up here in the corner is our old friend Zephyr, bringer of the warm wind and an inveterate blower. Zephyr isn't only blowing the anemone to life, look at all those roses pouring out of his mouth as well. The rose is specifically Venus's flower. The ancients believed that it only came into being at a very important moment, the first time Venus set foot on dry land. We've got the land here, all right. These are orange trees, the ancient symbols of the Medici. And this figure here, she's probably one of the Horae, the embodiments of the seasons. She's the Horae of spring, I warrant. Look at these gorgeous cornflowers painted on her dress. And see here, she's wearing a girdle of roses. The Horae is handing a cloak to Venus so that the modest Venus can cover herself. So what does it all mean? Well, it means that the painting seems to celebrate an important arrival, an arrival that brings fertility. Is it therefore another marriage painting, joyously commissioned to celebrate the arrival in the Medici family of another fertile bride? I think so. But that's conjecture. What's certain is that this isn't the birth of Venus, it's her disembarkation. She's arrived somewhere on her shell, and when she touches the land, it blooms. What could this be then? Well, I think it's in here again. Hesiod's Theogony. Having been born of Uranus's testicles and drifted across the sea, Venus made her way to sea-washed Cyprus and stepped ashore, a modest, lovely goddess, and about her slender feet the grass grew. So, the painting we've been calling The Birth of Venus ought properly to be called Venus, having been born of Uranus's testicles, arrives in Cyprus and makes things grow. But for some reason, that title never caught on. There are a million stories in the world of art. This has been just one of them.
So what do you think so far?
Very
Brilliant. What really, I mean, amazes me, maybe I'm not that deep of person, but these artists think of these, in these paintings with such historical or mythological intent when they start these paintings. You know, I have a hard time relating to that.
I'll talk to you later. It's been a very frustrating hour.
Okay, but I mean, these things do happen. Maybe
Well,
multiple issues.
and to your point, during the Renaissance, which is what we've looked at so far, all of these paintings were commissioned, and they were commissioned for what would have been highly educated, well-read aristocracy type people, and who had specific ideas that they wanted to have portrayed in the paintings that they were buying. And so the artists themselves may not have originated the concept.
Thank you.
Yeah, it may have been as, like, for example, in the one painting he was describing by Botticelli, you know, as a wedding gift. And, you know, they sort of weave, you know, their knowledge of Greek mythology and, well, Greek and Roman mythology into the painting, you know, because there are stories that sort of parallel what they're hoping for, which is the fertility and the growth of the family and things like that. So, and there's lots of these, you know, we're going to continue watching, but you know, I thought that this particular series was really fascinating because it gives you some interesting background on paintings that you've seen, that you've looked at, and never really thought about. You know, why were they painted? You know, why were they painted the way they were? And so, anyway, we're going to continue on. Does anybody need to take a break? Bathroom, coffee, anything like that? Okay. All right. All right. So onward we go.
There are paintings whose meaning is a mystery. There are painters who led mysterious lives, but only rarely, very rarely, do we encounter an utterly mysterious painting by an utterly mysterious painter. That's the case with The Tempest, the masterpiece by Giorgio da Castelfranco, better known to you and me as Giorgione. The Tempest hangs in the Accademia Gallery in Venice, a city packed with great pictures. But so precious is The Tempest that they wouldn't even let us into the same room to film it.
This is an icon of Western culture and is possibly the best conserved of Giorgione's works still in existence. Entire books have been written about the content of this painting, which can be interpreted at various different levels.
For 500 years, The Tempest has led its many admirers on a wild goose chase. To this day, there is no agreement about what we're actually witnessing when we look at it. Who is she? Who is he? What are they doing? And where are they? Although Giorgione is considered perhaps Venice's greatest painter, he wasn't actually from Venice. He came from the Venetian mainland, the Veneto as it's called, a land of dark hills, mysterious mists, and silhouetted castles, whose poetic presence always haunts the background of his art.
The ancient Egyptians understood that they could use sound to reduce their weight and the gravitational.
Castelfranco, where young Giorgio was born in 1477, is a pretty medieval city, surrounded by a moat. We know Giorgio came from a humble family, but he was tall and imposing, which is how he got his nickname, Giorgione, Big George. Big George's earliest work in Castelfranco is now in ruins. It's a puzzling frieze of musical instruments and astronomical diagrams painted in the house of a local nobleman. Like so much of Giorgione's art, the Castelfranco frieze seems to speak to us in riddles. At an early age, he left Castelfranco for Venice, where he quickly made his mark with these mysterious fantasies filled with poetic longing for the Veneto. But there's a problem. We know Giorgione's art is revolutionary, that he had many followers and was much copied, but we don't know exactly what he painted. None of his work is signed, not even The Tempest. unlike other painters of Renaissance Italy, very little is known about him, except for the date of his death and a few dates of some of his paintings. But when we know the date, the painting is lost. And when we have the painting, we have the date. With one exception, there is only one painting in Vienna, Laura, which is dated on the back of 1506. So it's a very mysterious painting. We know almost nothing about Giorgioni's life. We know that he lived in this square in Venice, that he played the lute beautifully, that he was very handsome, that women liked him, and that, perhaps as a result, he died young. It seems that his handsome looks and his beautiful lute playing brought him to the attention of a certain Venetian lady. She caught the plague. Giorgione, while conducting this illicit affair with her, caught it too. He died in 1510, aged a little over 30, but he'd done enough. He'd changed the course of art. Like no one before him, Giorgione was to feed the Venetian appetite for melancholy ambiguity. It's an appetite the inhabitants of Venice seem to inherit with their mother's milk. The city itself, a floating labyrinth, decaying before our eyes, is a puzzle waiting to be solved.
È una scoperta continua, la gente. People like to look up and discover in the same place different things that they have possibly never seen before. This happens even to us Venetians. Whenever we look up or look around, we discover something new.
We'd know more about Giorgione, a lot more, if what he painted on the outside of this unnaturally blank building hadn't crumbled into the water. This used to be the warehouse of the German merchants in Venice. Once it was completely covered with frescoes by Giorgione. Today, it's Venice's main post office. And only this tiny decayed fragment remains. The Tempest was painted just before Giorgione's horribly premature death in 1510. We know it was probably commissioned by Gabriele Vendramin, a member of one of Venice's most powerful families. This is Vendramin as an old man, painted by Titian, who was always thought to have been Giorgione's pupil. But notice the cross in this painting. It's terribly important. This cross, which still exists behind this golden door, was thought to contain a fragment of the actual cross on which Jesus was crucified. Yet one day, to the city's horror, it was dropped accidentally into this canal in Venice and sank to the bottom. No one could find it until Gabrielle's famed ancestor, Andrea Vendramin, plunged into the water and fished it out. It was a miracle, so the Venetians believed. Their cross was safe. The miracle of the cross gave the Vendramin family great fame in Venice, but you wouldn't know it today. I tracked down the family palace and found it to be a simple hardware store. Looking around at the nuts and the bolts, it was impossible to imagine that in this building, Giorgione's Tempest was to hang, largely unseen, for 400 years. When Gabriele Vendramin came to acquire the Tempest, he probably commissioned it directly from the painter. 20 years after Giorgione's death, a visitor to Vendramin's palace remembers seeing a little landscape with a storm, with a gypsy and a soldier by Giorgio of Castelfranco. Already, the Tempest's real meaning was lost. So perhaps it never had one.
Tempest is a very mysterious painting. This is proved by the very fact that there are 30 to 40 different interpretations. One of them being that it has no meaning at all. This is one interpretation like the others. From some contemporary sources, we gather that the sort of patterns like Gabriele Vendramin, who honored the painting in the 1920s, loved to have guests in their homes and to show them some paintings like this and to play with them whether they would understand or not. This is the reason why many scholars, including myself, the vast majority of scholars, including myself, believe that the meaning was intended. Whether we are able to understand it or not, but that the meaning was intended.
Vendramin never sold the Tempest. He left a will forbidding his heirs from selling it too. For the next 300 years, hardly anyone saw it. One visitor to Venice who did was the poet Lord Byron. It became his favourite painting and obsessed him. Byron believed the Tempest was a portrait of Giorgione himself with his family. "'Tis but a portrait of his son and wife and self," he wrote. But Byron had a taste for other people's wives, and he fell in love with the woman he took to be Giorgione's spouse. Such a woman, love in life, he drawled. In 1932, the Italian state finally bought the painting, and it's hung in the Accademia ever since, daring all comers to guess its true meaning. Interpreting the Tempest has become one of the great cottage industries of art history, but somewhere out there, there's a solution, and that solution must lie in the painting itself. Guess what? I think I found it. So what do we see in the Tempest? The setting looks much like Castelfranco itself, underneath a stormy sky with lightning in it. There's a beautiful mother suckling a baby, and a most handsome young man, tall, finely dressed, who seems to be her partner. So was Byron right? Is this Giorgione and his family? No, it isn't. Although we know so little about Giorgione, we do amazingly know what he looked like. He painted a self-portrait in which he pretends to be King David slaying the giant Goliath. Not all the picture has survived, but the face that remains is clearly not the young man in the Tempest. So who is he? And was Byron right or wrong about what he said?
The soldier is in fact a comrade of the sock. If you look at his socks, you will see that they are different colors. The comrades of the sock were private associations very common in the Venice of that time.
Stream 85 plus channels and save up to $500 a year with YouTube TV. Try it free.
Hey guys, if you have any type of knee pain, then check these out. I was suffering for over 2 years from horrible
of young hedonists who got together to act plays, enjoy themselves, accompany wedding processions.
But just because the chap in the Tempest is dressed as a fashionably louche Venetian, it doesn't mean that's what he represents. Venetian art likes to set things in the present, to take the Bible or the tales of the gods out of the distant past and make them real. Oh, how they liked their costumes, just as Byron does. Also hanging in the Accademia is this huge masterpiece by one of Giorgione's descendants, Veronese. It's called The Feast in the House of Levi, and it too is a painting with a checkered history. The Feast in the House of Levi isn't its original name. Its first name was The Last Supper. And what it actually shows is the most famous dinner ever eaten. We don't recognize it these days because Christ and his disciples are wearing contemporary clothes, and because many of the characters in the painting aren't really supposed to be there. There's no mention in the Bible of dwarfs and jesters attending the Last Supper. So could The Tempest, like Veronese's Feast at the House of Levi, be a secret religious painting? Professor Salvador Setis believes it is.
What I did is basically to read all the literature on painting and to see what is meaningful in painting and what is not, which means the man, the woman, the child, columns which are there, a serpent which is hidden in a bush, the lightning in the sky. But since the lightning was widely used as a symbol of God in the Johnny's time, I assumed that there was an equivalence between God and the lightning. And it's a definite possibility that this is that actually Tempest represents Adam and Eve with the first born child, Cain, actually. And the serpent would be an allusion to the original sin. So all the different elements would be explained.
But there's a major flaw in this surprising Adam and Eve theory. When the painting was cleaned, that serpent which Professor Setis claims to have located under this bush turned out to be nothing more than the root of a tree. Can this really be the Garden of Eden? I've looked at it on many occasions for many hours and never once felt any religious atmosphere. Over at the Academia, they prefer the simplest of all explanations.
Which of the many interpretations of the Tempest's meaning do you think is probably closest to the truth?
Nessuna. None of them. None of them. None of them. I like Michele's one best of all. A storm with a gypsy who is feeding her child and a shepherd.
But everybody else has been wrong.
I don't know.
If the painting isn't Giorgioni's family, if it doesn't mean nothing at all, if it isn't a religious image, what can it be? Well, there is one area in which the artists of Venice specialized and took particular delight: the stories of the gods, mythology. Above all, a lot of fun was had enjoying the antics of Zeus, the god of thunder, a master of disguise whose appetite for good-looking mortals was Clintonesquely insatiable. Here's Giorgioni's pupil, Titian, showing Zeus disguised as a shower of gold coins, making love to the surprised Danae. Zeus had a different disguise for every affair. To seduce the nymph Callisto, he took the form of another woman, Diana the Huntress, a stimulating example of girl-on-girl mythology. To make it with Io, he came down as a barely visible cloud of excitement. And it wasn't just girls he went for. Attracted by young Ganymede, Zeus turned into an eagle and had his violent way with the boy. That lightning in the background of the Tempest must surely indicate the presence of Zeus, the god of thunder and thrower of lightning bolts. But he's not seducing the woman in the picture, is he? She seems to be the partner of the handsome young man. So what is Zeus doing here? After 500 years of mystery, I think I've cracked Giorgioni's code. There is a story, and only one story, which fits snugly with what we see in The Tempest. It's outlined here by Homer in the Odyssey, the most celebrated of all classical poems. It concerns Demeter, the goddess of fertility, who made things grow. This is her, with her clothes on, but I think Giorgioni's painted her in The Tempest with her clothes off. According to Homer, Demeter met a handsome mortal at a wedding called Iasion. Even though she was a goddess and he was human, they made love in a ploughed field and had a baby. That baby was Plautus, the god of wealth. Zeus, Demeter's brother and, complicatedly, her former lover, who often enjoyed the embrace of mortals himself, was so angered by this illicit relationship between Demeter and Iasion that he killed Iasion with a lightning bolt, smote him with his bright thunder, says Homer. The Tempest shows the moment just before Zeus's deadly revenge. That's why the atmosphere is so charged. Demeter has given birth to the god of wealth, but Iasion is about to be hit by a deadly thunderbolt. His crime? He was a mortal who made love to a god. And we're like the audience at a Christmas pantomime who can see what's going to happen and who want to shout, "Look out! Look out!" Once you know the picture's overall meaning, every little detail falls into place. Demeter's unexpectedly blonde hair, there's not too many blondes in Venice, is described by Homer, who calls her fair-tressed Demeter, golden-haired Demeter. Poor Iasion has a broken column behind him. That's bad luck. Broken columns, even in cemeteries today, represent a life cut short. In classical art, Plautus, the god of wealth, was often shown as a baby boy in the arms of a woman. But the cleverest clue, so easy to overlook, is the mysterious white bird perched on the roof behind. One of Demeter's attributes, the things that appear in pictures next to her so you know it's her, is a crane. This beautiful white bird flies south in the spring to rear its young, so it represents fertility like her. But the crane has another role in mythology. It's renowned for standing on one leg, so during the Renaissance, they believed that in its other foot it held a stone, and if it ever fell asleep, that stone would drop, hit it on the other leg, and wake it up. And so the crane became a symbol of vigilance. Always look around you. Be prepared for what happens next. It's exactly the kind of message that a rich man like Gabriel Vendramin, whom Plautus was so favoured, would keep on the walls of his study as a constant reminder of the fickleness of wealth. Here today, gone tomorrow. The Tempest is a warning. Watch out, because you never know where or when the lightning may strike. It's a good message for Gabriel Vendramin. It's a good message for all of us. There are a million stories in the world of art. This has been just one.
We should paint that big bird.
English countryside is a deceptive terrain. It looks so sweet, so friendly, so innocent, but it's none of those things. Anyone who's listened to a few episodes of The Archers will already know that dark stuff happens in the English countryside. Sharp of tooth, red of claw, it's a deadly battleground. The great English painter Thomas Gainsborough certainly knew this. He was a country boy born and bred, a Suffolk lad. Gainsborough recognised that beneath the deceptively innocent surfaces of outdoor England, unpleasantness was thriving. Lives were being ruined. Greed was being shown. Voila, Gainsborough's masterpiece of outdoor Englishness, his famous double portrait of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. Summer corn glistening in the sun, fluffy clouds scudding across the sky, English oaks dotting the horizon, and sitting in front of it all like a pair of giant spiders in the middle of a web, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. Him with his big gun, nonchalance.
Yeah. So anyway. Yeah, or not, she's super. No, but
If this woman invited me up to spend the weekend at her big country house, I don't think I'd accept. Something's going on here. It's a pretty scene, it's Merry England, but something's going on here. This is Gainsborough's town, Sudbury in Suffolk, where Mr. Andrews and Gainsborough probably went to school together. It's a tea and cakes town these days, somewhere ye olde on the tourist circuit. But when Gainsborough was born here in 1727, this was a real slab of rural England. A cloth town in serious decline.
Daniel Defoe came and visited Sudbury quite early on in the century and thought that it was a very, very poor place with one or two rich people. All the poor people may well eat the rich ones, he said. So it was quite a depressed town, and Sudbury has always been an earthy little working town, and its main industry has been weaving. And indeed the Gainsborough family were concerned with that, not only Gainsborough's father, but also his very much more successfully his uncle. It was quite a shaky business, I think.
They made velvet here. Wool, of course, Sudbury is surrounded by sheep, and, interestingly, silk. This is Gainsborough's garden, and this beautiful old survivor is a mulberry tree planted here in 1610. It would have been handy for the Gainsboroughs to have a mulberry tree in the garden, because mulberry trees are what silkworms feed on, and the Gainsboroughs were in the cloth trade. Gainsborough's father was a trader in fine materials. And so, in a way, was his son. If you ever get a chance to examine closely a portrait by Gainsborough in his prime, have a good look at the clothes they're wearing. The silks, the satins, the brocades, the lace. He had a genius for painting precious fabrics. He knew about them from birth and loved them dizzily, I think. Picture after picture by Gainsborough at his best is a glorious advert for his father's calling. Even Mrs. Andrews, the baddie in this picture, gets an outfit to die for. Pale blue silk in an outrageous expanse. Not what you'd usually wear if you're out killing pheasants. I get the feeling in a lot of Gainsborough's pictures that he liked the clothes more than he liked the people wearing them. He was notoriously unimpressed by his sitters. When he was painting Sarah Siddons, the most celebrated actress of her times, the Elizabeth Hurley of the Georgian age, he suddenly exploded, "Damn your nose, there's no end to it." And behind the backs of his sitters, he was even more scathing.
Yes, he was known to complain about his sitters, but I think being a portraitist is really a considerable problem, that you have all these people who by definition want to look better than they probably do. And that, having that day in, day out of about 8 people a day, must be a considerable problem. And most portraitists got very, very bored with self-important people rushing through their studio.
Gainsborough hated doing fashionable portraits. The cursed face business, he called it. His tragedy was he was so damn good at it. They only have one part worth looking at, said Gainsborough of the fashionable types he painted, and that is their purse. So he sniffed the air and headed for where the biggest purses were gathered. He moved to Bath, where all the celebrities of Georgian England would visit to take the waters.
Quiet.
It's time for church.
There are no churches.
And to have likeness done by Thomas Gainsborough, the Mario Testino of his age. He ended up in London, naturally, the most fashionable portrait painter in England, who was usually forgiven his little rudenesses because he captured a likeness better than anyone else. He had the gift all right. Gainsborough had the fastest hands of any painter this country's ever produced. He painted like an expert swordsman, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And the rich have always been able to take a bit of rudeness from their artists in return for some breathtaking immortality.
He realised that he had to cover a vast amount of canvas in order to compete with people. There are one or two records of head and shoulder portraits which he completed in 1 hour 40 minutes, and that is going at sensational speed. There's records of him getting drunk for a fortnight and then doing the skirt of a great full-length portrait in a night. So I think he used that speed to good effect so that he could get drunk for a fortnight, and also so that he could get through the acreage of canvas and compete in the room.
Gainsborough was the youngest of 9 children. His father, the cloth merchant, fell on hard times and was bankrupt. Young Thomas wasn't going to enter the cloth business. He had another talent, art. And according to a story, which I don't quite believe, but I'll tell you anyway, when he was a boy, he saw a man trying to steal pears from his garden and drew him so convincingly that the neighbours recognised this scoundrel immediately and nabbed him. Young Gainsborough was also naughty. Another story, which I do believe, is that he used to forge his own sick notes for school and capture his parents' handwriting perfectly. From his days of forging sick notes at school and throughout his life, Gainsborough was a subtle subversive, always doing things on the sly. At the age of 18, he got married in secret to the illegitimate daughter of a duke. He'd got her pregnant. She brought in £200 a year, which was very useful, and which Gainsborough began to supplement busily by painting some of the most memorable portraits in British art. This is the house the Gainsboroughs lived in. It's an estate agent's now, and no one seems to know what went on in which room. But it could be that this is the spot in which Gainsborough painted Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. These days, the picture hangs in the National Gallery and is famous the world over as Gainsborough's earliest masterpiece. But until 50 years ago, no one outside the Andrews family even knew it existed. The National Gallery didn't buy it until 1960. So here's an interesting question. Why was this painting kept so secret for so long? Andrews inherited half of the estate from his father, Aubrey as it was called. His wife brought in the other half when they married in 1748. So although it wasn't, strictly speaking, a marriage of convenience, it was certainly a most convenient marriage, which left both of them twice as rich as they had been. So far, so normal. Here are 2 small-town moneybags celebrating the union of 2 big-time purses. But something went wrong in the making of this much-moneyed wedding portrait. I often watch people walking past this entertaining picture and enjoy it a lot. But it's amazing how often they miss two crucial things about it. One is how frightening Mrs. Andrews is, but the second is that it's unfinished. If you look closely at that brown splodge in the middle of her lap, something's missing. The picture is incomplete. Gainsborough never had his final say in this painting. He meant to show something here, but never did. What was it? And why did he never put it there? Why is Mr. and Mrs. Andrews unfinished? These are the questions that need to be asked. Here you have a painting that's famous the world over as the perfect image of rural England. But just as paradise had a snake in it, so Mrs. Andrews had on her lap something that never got painted, something that someone somewhere didn't want us to see. And I'm sure I know what it is. The single most aggressive and destructive act ever perpetrated by the government of Britain on its rural folk was the long and drawn-out passing of the Enclosure Acts, which took the common land away from the people, put a fence around it, and gave it to the landlords. It was unforgivable. It ruined the livings of so many country people. Gainsborough's heart always went out to them. The poor had his sympathy, not the rich and the landed, like Mr. and Mrs. Robert Andrews. This is the exact spot on which Gainsborough painted his wonderful picture. You must recognise that oak behind me, this big fat English oak, which is exactly the same tree, although it's thicker now than it was before. And over there, of course, is that beautiful slab of the English countryside, which is behind Mr. and Mrs. Andrews in the picture. Still, I think, really recognisable. Now, Mr. Andrews is standing just about here. He's been out hunting, so he's holding his shooting rifle nonchalantly under his arm. Mrs. Andrews, she's sitting here, demurely, with her legs crossed. Now, I've seen this picture so many times in the National Gallery, but it wasn't until I came here and stood in this spot that I realised something incredibly interesting about it, which is that behind Gainsborough in the painting, hidden from sight, is the house in which Mr. and Mrs. Andrews actually lived. Now that's significant, not just because you didn't know it was there in the painting, but also because it explains one of the great mysteries of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, which is why she is dressed in this flamboyant outfit of flowing pale blue silk, while he is wearing his scruffy shooting gear. Obviously what's happened is that he's been out doing the shooting while she has been waiting for him indoors and has now come out to meet him just a few hundred feet away from the house to sit on his bench. The biggest change in the landscape, of course, is this huge row of trees behind me. There's a forest down there now that isn't in the Gainsborough picture. Now that was planted deliberately by one of the later owners of the house. Apparently, they built a council estate at the bottom of the hill. So the owner decided to try and mask it, and he planted this huge forest in between it and him. The corn's gone, of course, it's all been grassed over now, but if you look carefully, you can actually still see the echoes of these furrows. There's little bits of them left. But what's interesting about the furrows is that they're what's left over from this revolutionary new use of an implement called the seed drill. Now this seed drill was the very latest in agrarian technology. It made harvesting the corn so much easier. And Mr. Andrews was very proud of being a pioneer in its use.
The seed drill wasn't widely taken up initially. Wealthy landowners were keen to use it as it was a public demonstration of how wealthy and how advanced they were. It wasn't received widely by the majority, especially the farm workers. In fact, they could see with this change, with mechanisation coming in, that actually their jobs would be a threat.
Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, these newlyweds, are showing off the fruit of their union, their land, and their agricultural progressiveness. Of course, there isn't a peasant in sight, And none of this was achieved by these two getting their hands dirty in any way.
What the painting shows to me is the importance of the new farming methods to him, and there's a real statement that he's actually, you know, a very wealthy, powerful landowner and really accepting all these new ideas. And it's sort of really, look at me, I'm so, you know, really ahead of the game.
People say that Gainsborough was having a go at the rural rich in this picture. I think that's right. He was. These are greedy people. They've snatched the land away from its rightful owners, and they're parading themselves in front of it, while Gainsborough disapproves. But there's something else going on here, something more personal. If Gainsborough really did go to school with Mr. Andrews, I think he rather liked him. Mr. Andrews is sympathetically painted. He's dim but nice, lounging around on his land with his gun and his dog. It's Mrs. Andrews who worries me. She's surely one of the least attractive women in Gainsborough's art. Uptight, clenched, stiff. She's only a teenager, 18 years old, but she already has the demeanour of a middle-aged rural harridan. And what is that on her lap, that unfinished blob of canvas? I think there's only one thing it can be. That must be a feather, the tail feather of a cock pheasant, I warrant, and the rest of the bird is sitting on her knee. He's been out hunting, he's brought the bird back, she's got it on her lap, on a cloth, so that it doesn't bleed into her beautiful blue dress. But if that is a cock pheasant, what's it doing there? Is the dead bird an innocent avian corpse brought back from the morning's hunt and no more? Or does it have another meaning, a deeper one, a symbolic one? Gainsborough was a great admirer of Dutch art. And in Dutch art, you often find women, wenches, shopgirls, wives, holding up dead birds, cocks, snipe, duck. Look at this buxom butcher's maid. How fiercely she clutches that cock. Look at her unsmiling determination. Does it remind you of anyone? Fact is that most dead birds in Dutch art represent a man who's fallen into the clutches of a determined woman and been plucked. The bird in the hand of a buxom Dutch woman is invariably intended as a warning to us guys not to let ourselves be grabbed where it hurts. And all the naughty double entendres involving the word cock are entirely intentional. Gainsborough, a country man, would have known all about these low country readings, and he would, I suggest, have been after just such a double entendre in his picture before it was censored. I think that he didn't like Mrs. Andrews much, that he was warning Mr. Andrews of the fate of the cock pheasant that's fallen into her lap and been grabbed. Just before this picture was finished, I think its secret meaning was spotted, and that Mrs. Andrews realised all too clearly how unflattering a portrait of her was being painted here. The picture was never finished because the sitters finally realised what Gainsborough was saying about them and didn't like it. Ah yes, the English countryside. Corn in the field, the larks in the sky, and the poison in the hearts of the people. Mr. and Mrs. Andrews is a great masterpiece of Gainsborough's early work, but if only he'd been allowed to complete it, it would have been greater still. There are a million stories in the world of art. This has been just one of them.
I'm going to stop it there because we're at what, like 11:40 or so. Anyhow, what do you guys think about that? Any thoughts about any of the background stories or anything on any of these paintings? Do you like finding out about that stuff, or is that kind of like, yeah?
I think it's very, very interesting, and the double entendres are meaningful and need to be explained because of the distance that we are from their culture. And I just enjoyed it very much.
Okay. All right. So we got one thumbs up. Anybody else?
I liked it very much also. I agree with Rebecca because you don't know the basis for some of these paintings. And it was like the last painting was just some friends of his. So it wasn't anyone that was really famous, it was just some friends of his. But one of the things is that, and one of the things I was looking at was in the Greek mythology, when he did the Venus and all the pictures that resembled Venus. And
are you talking about Botticelli in the previous painting?
Yes, in the previous one now, when he was showing all the Venus and a lot of the pictures of Greek mythology, and Zeus and all of those. I always wondered, at some point in history, or some point in development of a nation, development of Greece and all those other places in that area, man sought to find something that was more powerful, more higher than that he could look up to. And I guess, and that's when the great god Zeus and all of the other mythical gods were created. And that so they could have something to look toward. And so then the painters got involved and did their rendition of what the gods looked like and what Venus looked like, and built a story around them that just carried over through the various centuries. And today we still think of Zeus as the mighty powerful guy of sky and the thunder and all these kind of things. So I like that backdrop on that. So it gives some context to some of the paintings for sure. And then the one painter that we thought that perhaps, at least the narrator thought that his paleness of some of the paintings was because of the fact that he was kind of sickly himself and maybe a bit pale. But I loved all of the background information, even though it was the narrator probably took a lot of liberties. So you have to kind of sort some of those things out because no one really knows. There's nobody here from that century and everything. And why did they make so many nude women at that time? I mean, that's a whole new area of inquiry that you could see. Was that man's way of not having any little videos, you know? And today is different. And so you're gonna say we worship her, but this is what we're doing, you know? And so that's a whole bit is amazing because some people feel uncomfortable with nude figures. I was listening to the lady, she's saying, anatomical, it was not correct, the body was not correct, but it was there and it did give you a different kind of insight and feeling on what was going on and what the artist was trying to say. So I thought all of those things had a lot of meaning to them and a lot of good things that we can take forward and as we shape our own ideas of art and history and today's art.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, in response to what you were saying, yeah, she was saying that it was aesthetically pleasing interpretation. It was done, though the anatomy was not correct. You know, Botticelli did it because it was a more aesthetically pleasing solution and made her appear to be more graceful and fluid.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where you come in, you begin to take artistic liberty, you know, and it's like, okay, you know that, you know, this bone's connected to that bone, but, you know, for you know, for your aesthetic purposes of the painting, you want to elongate something or, you know, create longer lines to get a particular visual effect, right?
Right.
And, you know, another point I want to make to you, okay.
Hello.
Is about, you know, the female body and nudity. Well, if you think about art history, you know, the Christian church is probably the greatest purveyor of nudes anywhere in the world. Most of the religious art that was painted, you know, was full of nudes, including the Sistine Chapel. You know, and that's always been kind of part of that. There was a turn, though, in the Renaissance where at some point, you know, artists began to create this image of the female body. And one of the disturbing factors, if you look at art history, is that at that point, it kind of became nudity for the sake of nudity, and also the enjoyment of the male public that a lot of these painters were sort of catering to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the big divisive issues right now. Well, really in the 20th century and 21st century, really since about the 1950s and 60s, there's been a big back and forth struggle in the art world about the place of nudes. And, you know, as a reaction, it's kind of interesting.
Sure.
Yes.
But don't you think that was the expression of the artists? And I think in those times with those nudity, I'm sure there was a controversy and critics and discussion about it.
Well, I mean, you know, at a certain point around about the 1800s with the Renaissance, or not the Renaissance, but the Impressionists. And in fact, he talks about a painting done by Manet, specifically about this subject, which is really fascinating. But, you know, where we are today is really an interesting kind of situation. Because if you're a female artist and you paint a female nude, it seems like galleries, museums, and things like that want to celebrate that. If you're a male and you paint a female nude, you're a dirty old man.
Yeah.
But what about vice versa?
Pardon?
What about vice versa? If a woman paints a male nude?
Well, that's the interesting thing. You know, I think in a lot of cases, and this is just my own personal feeling, okay, because I see it happen all the time. You know, women artists can paint male nudes, female nudes. Nobody really thinks anything of it. Male artists, on the other hand, you know, paint a nude, and there's always an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you should sign your name Shirley Jones.
Well, that's and again, that kind of brings up a different conversation, but that is in fact why I do not sign my paintings.
Oh,
that is why that is why I put that chop there. And if anybody sees my name on the card in a show or something, it's always C.S. Scoggins. They don't know who C.S. Scoggins is. They don't know whether that's a male or
we know.
Well, you do, yes. But you see, it removes that stigma or that layer, so that people
Right.
can get beyond the fact that, oh, this is a guy painting a naked woman,
Yeah.
right? Or a nude woman.
Huh.
There is a difference between naked and nude, you know. But in
Charles, may I make another comment about Gainsborough?
Sure.
Not to get off this subject, which is very interesting, but I did want to say before it's too late. He, of all the people that they talked about, of those mystery type questions, was the one who, in his own veiled way, showed that he liked the clothing on the models more than he liked the models,
Right.
and that he was making a political statement about class society and how the rich had taken advantage of the poor. And I thought that was fascinating that it was brought out in today's video.
And there, you know, and that's just one example of literally thousands. It's like a lot of the paintings that you look at, you know, in institutions like museums and things like that, have a background story to them. And there's more than necessarily just the initial, you know, face value of what you're visually seeing. And if you begin to get into the context of who painted it, when it was painted, why it was painted, who commissioned it, things like that, and what was going on historically, you know, at that time, it's a really rich story. Because a lot of painters put a lot of things into the paintings that don't have anything to do necessarily with your initial first reading of what the painting is about.
There's always a sub-story. There's always a backstory that makes the painting you look at so much more interesting. And then to address what you said about why men get criticized for painting women, I think that it may just be because of the rise of feminism, and women are pushing back against a society, mores, is that what you call it?
Right.
That has always given men, quote unquote, the upper hand, and with the rise of feminism, all of that's being pushed back against now.
Yeah, but that's definitely a big factor in it, you know, and the fact that, you know, there, and particularly in the 1800s, between mid 1800s and forward, through, say, you know, the 1950s, 1960s, you know, the fact that most recognized artists were men painting the female body, you know, and so, you know, yeah, there is some pushback, you know, around, you know, that whole idea. And, you know, I can't make a determination whether that's right, wrong, or otherwise. It's just a historical fact that for a very long time, you know, it was generally male artists, you know, who were painting female nudes. And you know, do women have a right to feel somewhat upset about that? Sure. You know, I think a bigger question, though, is not what they were painting, but why more women artists are not, you know, more highly recognized, you know, historically. And that's, you know, that's a bigger thing for society to struggle with. Now, that's changing, you know. In fact, you know, women artists today, I don't know that they have a totally equal footing, right? But I think it's certainly vastly improved. And there are many women artists out there who have very, you know, successful and viable careers that probably would have been very difficult to have 100 years ago. So, Yeah, that's kind of my take on it. So, anybody else?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, not from Armando at least. Bob, you got anything? Azam, you guys have been kind of fairly quiet.
Well, that's me. I'm just a quiet kind of guy. I never speak up at all. So there you go.
Okay. Yeah. And John has been too, you know. I mean, yeah, you got anything on the subject? Oh, anything?
Well, you know, I've been taking all the comments and and I think in this last discussion about women artists, as you said, they really weren't prominent or brought to the foreground. They were in the background. You really heard about women artists until just recently. I would say that they came to be known.
Yeah. Well, the fact is, John, and we've talked about this in the past, it's not that women artists didn't exist.
Correct. Right.
Yeah, they certainly did. You can thank, a particular art history book, Jansen's, for example, for deleting them or burying them. Because Jansen's, I think, started, in the 1920s, 1930s, and it's been updated since then. But it's been woefully absent of the history of a lot of women artists from the Renaissance really forward. But that is beginning to change, okay? That is beginning to change.
Correct. And what you've actually showed us, we've had sessions where you've showed us women artists, and I forget which one it was, but there were a couple that, one particular in my back of my mind, I remember what was particularly painted only women, but they were clothed, not naked.
Yeah. Well, and there are many women artists who paint nothing but female nudes. I mean, contemporary,
Correct, right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it covers a full gamut. Okay. But yeah, I mean, if you go back all the way to the Renaissance, there were many women artists working.
Yes.
Almost none of them made the history books, really until about the last maybe 10, 20 years, that their names started showing up, in the pages of history books and things like that.
But did they even present themselves as women? Didn't a lot of them just dress like men, even though they were, because of the mores of the times?
We don't know.
Well, I think, I mean, certainly a lot of the women during the time of the Renaissance certainly dressed as women and, were certainly known. And some of them were fairly successful, but they had help. They had help because, as was the fashion or the custom during that time, your children sort of took on your skill, whatever you were. It was passed on to your sons or your daughters. And so when an artist had a daughter and she grew up, in a lot of cases, they became painters, or goldsmiths or whatever the skill was that the father had. And that was certainly the case in many of the cases in the Renaissance. So, and there were a good number of women working, and then later on, I think, what you were alluding to is that somewhere in like the late 1700s, maybe 1600s to like 1800s, there were women working who took on, the term is nom de plume, so they would take on like a pen name and work under a pen name, again, so that people wouldn't recognize, that they were a woman and be biased, against that.
That's true. That's true.
kind of like I'm not really taking on a nom de plume, but I'm being, very conscious of the fact that by using my first, middle, and last name, I identify my gender, and that there are biases in society today about maybe the type of art that I paint because I am a male.
Everything I've always done, I don't know why I started it that way, but I just put my first initial on my last name when I signed. I've never used my first name on signature.
Yeah. Personally, I think that's a wise and a good practice.
I used something different for my spa collection than I do for my portraits.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked that up early on because and I also, back in the day when I was borrowing paintings from the library, that was back in the 70s. One of the paintings that I had was the Blue Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one of my art history classes, it obviously came up appreciation, and that was when I was at the library in the art collection, that was one that was available. And I bought that, and I had it in my home for like almost a year, because you could have it for 6 months and then have it renewed for another 6 months.
Right.
And then wait till somebody else take it out and then go back again.
That's cool. Huh.
It was the Blue Boy.
Yeah.
I think the signature also is the statement the artist wants to make. If it is a woman who wants to make it known that she's a woman, then she's going to put her name on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, right now, if we're just talking about the context of society today, and you're operating as a full-time professional artist, I think a lot of women do put their name because they realize that being recognized as a woman opens up some possibilities and doors for them that wouldn't necessarily to a man right now.
Right. That's sort of what I was getting at, yeah.
So,
All right.
Armando, is it time for you to run to lunch?
Oh, yeah.
It is, I know. All right, anybody got anything before we go away? Okay.
I'd just like to ask you, are you going to give in-house art lessons at the Benson Center, or are you going to continue to do just Zoom, or are you going to do both, or what are the plans?
He doesn't know.
Well, I know that you have not been here for a while, or you've been here kind of off and on.
Yes.
I am, in fact, teaching a Friday class in drawing on site, and I am also doing a plein air class on Thursdays.
Oh, on Thursdays.
Yes. Yeah. So, which is why we don't have a Zoom class on Thursday anymore, because I'm out and about in the world with people running around painting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
From wherever.
And how do we get the information where you'll be on what Thursdays?
Well, you would have signed up for the plein air class, and I would have sent you a list of locations. And
well, my difficulty, I'm on and off because of doctors or physical therapies or whatever, and that's why I'm so. And this morning I would have been on, but the Wi-Fi was off. I could not get on network, and very frustrating morning. I spent over an hour to get your class, so I didn't get in till 11 o'clock.
Yeah,
it's been kooky.
Yeah, and now if you want me to send you the information on the plein air class, I'll be happy to do that.
I would love to get that, and maybe I can get somebody to take me wherever it is if it's within 5 miles of here.
Okay.
Charles, Charles, I did not get that information. I was out all last week, so please send it to me too, Becky Pinkney.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Be happy to. Okay. Yeah. If you want any, like the list of locations, things like that, probably the best thing to do, send me an email, and just say,
Okay.
hey, I would like you to, you know, give me the information on the plein air class, and I'll attach
Okay.
it and I'll just send it back to you. Okay. But in your case, Rebecca and Jean, I'm aware that you want it. I'll go ahead and send it. Okay.
Okay, you don't, so we don't need to send you an email then, correct?
No, the two of you do not. Okay.
Terrific.
I'm going to
All right.
Terrific. Thank you.
I don't remember the email with the location. I'm gonna check and then I'll send you an email.
Okay, Armando. I mean, I did send it to you. But
No, but I mean, I'm gonna go back on my old emails so that I find it.
yeah,
If I don't find it, so I just
yeah,
ask you.
yeah. If you need me to send it to you again, I'll be happy to. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Just,
look forward to going to the Art of the Portrait conference this week.
yes,
That are part of the-
that is starting up this week. Yes.
Yes, at the Grand Hyatt in Buckhead, and I look forward to being absorbed in all of the art world and get some much needed mental rest.
Now, are you just, how many days are you going? Because it's what, 4 days, 5 days?
Yes, from the 21st to the 24th.
Right. So it's a 4-day conference. Are you going all 4 days?
Yes, I'm trying to.
Okay.
Yeah, and to the banquet also. I have a full day of a full schedule this week of a lot of other things.
Oh, that's the
but
most important
trying
thing,
hard
the
to
banquet.
have my little mini vacation, you know, from my family and from my business and all these other kind of things.
Right.
So I need that for my mental health.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I not that I want to overburden you or anything. Okay, but after you go through that, at some point, you know, maybe on a Wednesday or something like that on the Zoom call, you know, I want to have a conversation with you, and you can tell us all about it. Okay. And if you're so inclined, okay, while there, take some photos and you know, and share them with me, and then I'll put them on Zoom, and you know, people can see kind of what's going on there. Okay.
Okay, we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. You know, it's not anything you have to do, but yeah.
Yeah, no. You know, sometimes we just feel. Sometimes I'm touched and inspired by a Kodak moment, and have to pull the cell phone or something out. You know, so okay. I won't take the regular camera. I'll just take my cell phone.
Yeah, just cell phone's fine. Yeah, I mean, cell phones. Most cell phones out there are as good as any kind of camera you can get out there most these days.
Yeah. So, but it'll just be a learning experience for me again, and I won't be put on I won't be in the spotlight or anything like that. And also this week, my college is going to be showing some of those videos that we'll be able to go and I want to look at it first before I tell anyone to go and look. Of the interview they did with me for being a graduate in the classes of 1970s. So, see what their students are doing now. So, but the only thing I took in that school was art appreciation and art, you know, that way, art history. But I've forgotten all those things I learned in the 70s, as most people take those art history classes and stuff. And it gets them going and it gets them appreciation, but they don't remember all the details about the artist and all of that. So I only retain 4% of that. So now I appreciate the classes the things that you show for us. The videos are helpful.
Okay. All right. Well, on that note, you know, you just reminded me of this. I wanted to make you aware. I'm going to be sending you some emails. And trying to set up a time on Zoom with, you know, each and every one of you so that I can do a short interview. And then I'm going to take those Zoom interviews and I'm going to combine them for a presentation for Older Americans Month and Evening of the Arts, okay? So I'll be talking to hopefully each and every one of you, okay?
I'm sorry, folks. I didn't mean to remind him of that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's on my list of things I have to do here in the next few weeks. So, At any rate, thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you guys
Being there.
tomorrow. Send anything you're working on that you want to have looked at, talked about, you know, whatever. And hopefully we'll see you tomorrow afternoon at about 2 o'clock. Okay?
Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
See you later.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.